Alright folks, this is Eldar Corsair back here with another strategy video. This time we're going to be looking at how to use a unit of Warwalkers in your Eldar army. The first thing to understand about the Warwalker is that it is a firepower unit. Yeah, technically it could fight. It's got 2 attacks, strength 5, it's a walker, it's got armor 10, so it's hard to hurt by just generic kind of, like melee weapons, but it's wasted when it's used in that role for the most part. There are situations where you're going to want to do that, mostly to save yourself from being shot at, but generally speaking, it's a firepower unit. You buy it and you put it in your army because you want to be able to shoot things to death. Now, the first setup, the most common setup that you see people using for Warwalkers is 2 scatter lasers. And the reason for that is that it's simple, it's effective, it's cheap. This kind of setup puts this model at 60 points, 8 strength 6 shots coming out of this one little guy here at 36-inch range. Now that 36-inch range is key because it lets you stay out of danger from a lot of guns that would otherwise hurt you, and it gives you a lot of play on what you can shoot on the field. Very effective setup, very devastating. I mean, you're blasting things to smithereens. It's a good setup. A couple more setups to think about. 2 Eldar missile launchers. Interesting setup. Gives you either single shot strength 8 missiles that are at 48-inch range, so even longer range, or it lets you use the blast portion to actually blast infantry when you're not shooting at vehicles. When you're just trying to shoot at infantry, man, 2 blasts from each one of these guys blasting one of these things, amazing. And given that you can put Warwalkers into a squadron, you can really maximize your firepower. And I do recommend that whenever you take Warwalkers, you try to take the full squadron of 3 to really maximize your use for that heavy support slot. Imagine you had 6 of these. I mean, suddenly we're taking 6 missile shots or 6 blasts from those things. Or if you have 6 walkers with scatter lasers, that's 24 strength 6 shots at 36-inch range. I mean, that's just an amazing volume of fire. We'll talk about later on in the video just what that means on the tabletop, what you can expect that to do. Now, another common setup that we hear talked about, not so much anymore in 6th edition because of the way the rules have changed, but it is worth talking about. It's the cheapest possible setup, 2 shuriken cannons. Unfortunately, these guns are only 3 shots each, and they're only 24 inches each. And that range is really what hurts this compared to the scatter lasers. That range really makes a big difference because suddenly in 6th edition, with hull points and glancing rules, strength 4 can glance you to death. So this guy, if he's shooting 24 inches, he's in range of bolters. He's in range of a lot of types of guns, plasma guns, things like that, that can actually hurt him from that 24-inch range, whereas this guy is not if he's staying in 36 inches. So that's a big difference there. The last interesting setup I want to mention is pretty interesting for 6th edition because of the way that the edition has worked out, and that is the possibility of taking a star cannon and a scatter laser. Now, you're only losing out 2 shots, so 6 shots instead of 8 in terms of, compared to a scatter laser, what you have. You have the same range, so that synergizes well. The difference is that these 2 shots are going to be AP2. And this can be really helpful for to give this unit a little bit more dual-purpose capabilities. If you do end up facing Terminators, and believe me, you are going to see many more Terminators hitting the field. And now that the Dark Angel book is out, you're going to see a lot of Terminator armor saves, all that kind of stuff. It can be nice to have that AP2 gun, even if all it does is lower that Terminator save to a 3+ invulnerable, so that it's taking its its shield. That can be pretty helpful. And against vehicles, the AP2 is actually helpful now. It's a lot better than the regular gun because you get that +1 on the table. This is not my preferred choice. If I'm going to go at that way, I'm just going to go with 2 of these, but it is an intriguing option. I want you to think about that option. I don't really recommend let's talk about the setups that I don't really recommend. The first one I don't really recommend is I don't recommend dual Bright Lances. They're way too expensive in the Eldar Codex. You can do something very similar to that if you're just taking the missiles, which are much cheaper and have an anti-infantry option. And yeah, they are a strength 8 AP2, all these shots, but it's just too many points for something that's only firing a few guns. And it really forces these guys into a niche where they're only dealing with really heavy vehicles. And sometimes you just don't see really heavy vehicles. Especially in this new edition of the game, you're not going to see as many Armor 13 and 14 vehicles around, especially ones that have weak side armor, because they can get glanced to death now. So something to think about in terms of your setups. I also don't really recommend these days dual star cannons. They're just very, very expensive. I would say in about 4 out of 5 situations, their AP2 is going to be irrelevant, and you're going to wish you had twice as many shots for half the point cost. You know, there are some situations, yeah, some Terminators without Storm Shields land nearby, and yeah, you have one good round where you gun them all down. You're going to be really happy, but those kind of situations are few and far between. So you have to really consider carefully. I'm not saying you shouldn't do this setup. I'm just saying really consider carefully how many AP2 saves you're dealing with, how many times your opponent that has armor 2 is in cover, in good cover anyways, meaning that, you know, they're still getting saves. These are very expensive and not very voluminous in the number of shots they put out. Okay. Okay, let's talk his abilities. Armor 10 all around, weakest armor in the game. These guys are very, very fragile, only 2 hull points each. Luckily, they're not open top, despite the presence of an open canopy. You know, that's a holdover from when they moved them into the heavy support slot. They made them not open topped, whereas before they were open topped when they were fast attack a few editions ago. They're pretty cheap. You know, not that hard to field. They do take up a heavy support slot, one of your precious firepower slots. So if you're going to take these guys, try to max out the unit as much as possible. Max out, you know, to the 3 every time. They can fight in melee. They have strength 5 attacks, a couple of them. Initiative sort of standard Eldar Guardian initiative. They're okay, but you don't want to waste them in combat unless it's a dire situation, or you know, there are maybe some situations where it sort of makes sense, but really they're bought as a firepower unit. And their ballistic skills, of course, disastrous Guardian ballistic skill. Man, it really hurts to be hitting on 4s only. However, you're putting out so many shots, especially with the setup of 2 shuriken cannons. It's not going to matter. Plus, you can also attach in or have a Farseer nearby. Sorry, you can't attach them, but you can have them nearby to cast Fortune or Prescience from the Divination Tree to let these guys re-roll to hit. So that can make them very deadly. Now, in terms of upgrades, the only upgrade you can really take is Spirit Stones to give them extra armor. It's not worth it. Just the way the 6th edition rules work, definitely not worth it. Not even the 5 points each. I really wouldn't recommend that. And one last thing to mention about these guys is that they scout. That means you get a free 6-inch redeployment, you know, before the game even starts. You deploy and you realize, oh, I deployed poorly before the game starts, I can go 6 inches and redeploy myself. Or you can also gain outflank. Now that's a whole other can of beans. That's when you come on the side of the board, you're coming on in reserve. From reserves, rather, and that is a different can of beans there. We'll talk about that in the strategy section, but keep in mind you do have those options. Now, in most cases, I like to just start with them on the table. I like to have them ready to shoot, nicely placed defensively, and ready to just fire every turn. Now, depending on how you outfit them, we know that these guys can blow away infantry, they can shred light vehicles, medium vehicles, we're talking armor 11, 12, pretty nicely. With these guns, maybe not armor 12 as much, they can glance it, but you'd be surprised how many glances you can get off of 24 strength 6 shots. But we know that they can do pretty good duty that way. Now, what I'm going to present to you is that even though Eldar has no Skyfire weapons in our codex, none whatsoever, we're not even allowed to take flak missiles. I'm going to present to you that these guys present somewhat of an anti-aircraft battery. So when you're dealing with flyers, specifically, right now I'm going to talk about armor 11 and lower flyers. So for instance, this Necron, Night Scythe over here. With these kind of guys, you got 24 strength 6 shots from a unit of Scatterwalkers. Even without re-rolling, even without using something like Guide or Prescience, these guys are going to average 4 strength 6 hits on that. That's not too bad. That is not too bad for something that is not even, tasked and not even meant to be good at fighting flyers. 4 strength 6 hits on a flyer when you weren't even didn't have Skyfire. That's pretty darn good. With armor 11, you have a pretty good chance of hurting this thing. Given the way the hull points work. Now, when you add in Guide or Prescience into the equation to give you rerolls to hit, we're vastly upping the number of hits. We're talking like 7, 8 hits potentially, despite the fact that you need 6s, maybe even more if you get a little bit lucky, because you're rolling so many dice. And that amount of hits is going to just shred. It's going to really harry this armor 11 flyer. Dealing with armor 11 flyers is not a problem with Eldar if you have a volume of fire and you can twin link it, you can re-roll it. And these guys make a good case for that. In a similar way, the dual missile launcher setup is actually pretty darn good, because that setup can actually deal not only with armor 10 and 11, but armor 12 flyers. That's the real problem with Eldar, is dealing with armor 12 flyers. 10 and 11, no problem. Our strength 6 guns, we fire dozens and dozens of shots from our units. It's those armor 12 flyers that are trouble, and these guys can really do a number on that. When you're re-rolling to hit, you've got a pretty darn good chance to hit. You know, you're going to average 1.5, maybe 2 hits from a unit of 3 Warwalkers, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're dealing with armor 12, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, given that you don't have a lot of other answers to armor 12 flyers. You know, armor 11 you can deal with. It's the armor 12, it's the Storm Ravens. You know, the other stuff that's armor 12, the Helldrakes. That's the hard part to deal with. That's when these missiles can really give you triple duty, because they can become good against heavy armored flyers. So something to think about there. Now let's talk about when to use outflank. When is outflank potentially useful to you? The first situation, let's just say you are using the Scatterwalkers, common setup. You know, you've got really good range on them. Why would you outflank? Why would you not be on the first turn, maybe not show up the second and third turn, you know, risk all that? Well, if you're facing an army like Imperial Guard that has really bad side armor but really good front armor usually, that actually could be a useful strategy. It could save your butt when you know, these guys come on the board from the side and suddenly get the side armor of a Chimera that's carrying the most important thing, and you're able to gun that you know, that crew inside that Chimera, whatever it was carrying, down with the rest of your army simply because you got that side armor. You know, glancing a Chimera with strength 6 is not amazing, although it can be done. You know, similarly with like other heavy tanks that have side armor, that the front armor might not be touchable. You know, might not be able to touch the armor 13 in the front of some vehicle, but when you get to the side armor of it, suddenly you can actually hurt it. And if you're facing an army that has tons of like armor 13 in the front and then armor 12 or 11 in the side vehicles, that might be your only recourse. So that might be sensible. Much more commonly, though, what you're going to see happen, and why you're going to see these guys outflanked, is that sort of suicidal, really aggressive kind of strategy of looking for units to really harass. So we've got a unit of these guys, and you got the 24. You've only got 24-inch guns, but you don't care. You're coming off the side, and you're going to start harassing stuff in here. You're going to start shooting it. Now, in the old edition, you used to be able to come off from outflank and from reserve and charge. So if you had a unit of like these guys, you come on, you gun down, let's just say 3 of them, and you charge in to beat on the last 2. Not necessarily because it's a good way to beat these guys, because it's not, but so that way you can be protected from shooting in your opponent's shooting phase. That can no longer work, because you can't assault when you come on from outflank, unless you have some sort of special rule in 6th edition. So that doesn't really work as well. But, you know, these guys are extremely cheap. The whole unit of them is only 120 points when outfitted with shuriken cannons. So some people like that kind of aggression. They like that sort of aggressive style that, you know, I've got threats over here, and suddenly turn 2 or 3, I've got like threats over here, and then I've got threats over here coming on, and you're like, what do I do now? Not my favorite strategy, because in Eldar you don't want to sacrifice anything. And really, if you put these guys in close to the enemy on an outflank with short-range weapons, I mean, you are sacrificing them. You're telling yourself these guys are not going to live. And that's not a great place to be with one of your heavy support choices, in my, you know, personal opinion. Now, in terms of fighting things, this is actually not a great unit to fight. We've got, looks like Grey Knight Purifiers over here. They have frag and crack grenades. Those crack grenades are going to rip you up. I mean, you better pray it's only like one guy surviving, and even then that he rolls badly against you, right? Because you don't cut their armor, you're not going to be great against him. When is it good to actually charge something? Well, when you've got something that can't really hurt you, or can't hurt you easily. You know, let's just say you fired at this unit, there's still 3 of them left, and you know they're not really going to be able to hurt you, so you're going to go in and try to get some extra attacks, and just try to get some free attacks on these guys, free hits. They can't really hurt you. Maybe if these guys are outfitted with, you know, frag grenades, they can try to hit you on 6s, but not very consistent in combat. They only get 1 attack like that. You know, you're gonna be able to hurt these guys pretty well. They're only toughness 3. You can actually hurt them with your small amount of attacks. It might be useful in some situations, but keep in mind, because these guys are a mobile gun battery, if something gets close enough to charge these guys and lives, you're probably doing something wrong, or you're probably being, you know, assaulted by, like, you know, some descent of angels or something. I mean, these guys really should not be fighting, because all their point cost comes in their guns. That's where it all comes from. So let's talk about strengths and weaknesses. You know, I mean, we've kind of touched on it already, but really the strength of these guys is the insane amount of firepower they can put out for a very relatively cheap cost. There are very few army codexes out there that wouldn't dream of having a unit like this in terms of the firepower it can put out. I mean, some of it fires, 6 missiles even for the cost it does, 210 points. I mean, that's pretty impressive. But to fire 24 strength 6 shots, I mean, at a good range, that's just crazy, given that Eldar has ways to guide that, to make that more likely to hit, and maybe even to doom targets that you shoot at, to make it more likely to wound them and force more wounds, right? The firepower is amazing from these guys, and with the way that the rules have worked, with the 25% coverage rules, they gain a lot. They gain a lot from that, to give you an example here, let's pretend this is some allied... this is an allied group of Marines there. I mean, that's 25% to me for sure, man. I mean, there you go. That's 25% coverage from just a couple of infantry figures in front of him. Now, that's only giving him 5% cover, but hey, 5% cover, that's better than this guy ever used to get easily out in the open. So, they benefit from those kind of rules. Use that cover. Whenever you can get cover, use it. When you can shoot your guns over your own, let's just say, Guardians or something, and get the cover from them, but, not give cover to the thing you're shooting at. Well, and actually, you don't even care about cover because these guns are only AP6, so, who cares? Gain the cover, because it's not like your opponent's is going to matter against you anyways. Get that cover with these guys. Now, in terms of weaknesses, the biggest weakness, of course, is that they are extremely fragile. 2 hull points each, armor 10 only. That means strength 4 guns can glance you. Strength 5 guns suddenly are really good against you. Strength 6 and up, I mean, they'll just shred you in any kind of amount of volume. I mean, just by comparison, if you're facing another Eldar player with Warwalkers, whoever's Warwalkers fire at the other Warwalkers usually win that battle instantly. That's just the way it is. There's no defensive thing, and you have to think about that because they are precious. They are so deadly. You need to protect them. You need to keep them protected at all times. To be honest, I will sometimes move them if I need to protect them. I'll move them in a way that will give more of the unit cover, but maybe only one of them can shoot, or maybe only 2 of them can shoot. Now, that's not my favorite thing, but sometimes I've done that just to keep them protected because it's more important for them to survive turn to turn, to be a threat on the next turn. So, take shots, but take intelligent shots. Get cover when you're shooting at things, okay? Alright guys, I hope that was helpful for you, and I hope that gave you some new ideas, or just gave you an idea of how to use these guys. And keep on watching. I'll have more of these 6th edition strategy videos coming up as time goes on. So take care everybody, and keep watching.